The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and Marin Holloway had stopped pretending it would. She walked along the rutted Northbridge Road with her shawl pulled tight across her shoulders, the basket of mending balanced against her hip, her boots heavy with mud that no amount of scraping at the stone steps would ever lift cleanly away. The hem of her gray wool dress was black with it. The wind came sideways off the moor, and the cold seeped into her bones, the way it always did in late October, as if winter had grown impatient and decided to come early just to test her. She did not mind the walk. She told herself she did not mind the walk. 3 miles to deliver mended linens to the vicarage, 3 miles back, a half-shilling in her pocket that would not stretch nearly far enough to cover what they owed the chandler. But it was a half-shilling, and her mother had taught her to be grateful for every coin that came honestly. Gratitude, her mother said, was a kind of armor. It kept the worst of the cold from reaching the heart. The road bent through a stand of beech trees, stripped half bare by the storm, their leaves plastered to the wet earth like spilled coins of copper and rust. Beyond the trees, the moor opened up gray and endless, with nothing on it but heather and wind and the distant gray shoulder of Pendle Hill rising against a sky the color of old iron. There was no one else on the road. There was rarely anyone on this road. The Northbridge Passage was a forgotten artery, used only by the few cottagers who lived between the village and the great houses farther east, and Marin had walked it so many times she could have done it blindfolded. Which was why, when she came around the bend by the broken milestone, the sight of a man lying in the muddy ditch beside the road struck her like a hand slapped flat against her chest. She stopped. The basket slid down her hip. For a moment she thought he was already dead. He lay so still, half on his side, one arm flung out as if he had been reaching for something when he fell. His coat was good. That was the first thing she noticed, before she noticed his face. The coat was very fine wool, dark green, with silver buttons along the cuff that caught what little light there was. Whoever he was not from her world. Marin set the basket down at the edge of the road and stepped carefully into the ditch. The water came over the tops of her boots at once, shockingly cold, and she gasped before she could stop herself. She did not curse. Her mother had never permitted cursing, and the habit of obedience had outlived the years when her mother could still hear her. But she gritted her teeth and waded the 3 steps toward him, and knelt in the mud, and put her hand against his cheek. He was warm. Not as warm as a man should be, but warm enough that he was alive. "Sir," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. She tried again, firmer. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. They were thin, the skin of them almost translucent, and she saw with a kind of strange tenderness that he was old. Older than her father had been when he died, older than the vicar, older than almost anyone she knew. His hair was white and fine and damp with rain, and there was a bruise spreading across his temple, where he must have struck a stone when he fell. His lips were gray. When she leaned close to his face, she could smell the rain on him, and beneath that, something else. Laudanum, faintly, and the cedar and camphor scent of expensive linen kept in a chest. The scent of a man who had been someone, somewhere, before he had ended up in a ditch on the Northbridge Road. "Sir, please," she said. "Please, open your eyes." He did. They were gray, the same color as the sky behind her, and they did not focus on her face at first, but rather on some point past her shoulder, as if he were looking for someone else. Then they found her, and a terrible exhaustion settled into them. "My horse," he whispered. His voice was a thread. "Did you see my horse, child?" Marin shook her head slowly. "No, sir. I saw no horse. I was—" He closed his eyes again. A small sound came out of him, and she realized with a clutch of horror in her chest that he was trying not to weep. Old men's weeping was a terrible thing. She had heard her own grandfather do it once, the night before he died, and she had never forgotten the sound. I was a fool. I was a stubborn old fool. They told me I should not ride out alone, and I— "Hush," she said. The word came out before she could think whether she had any right to say it to such a man. "Hush, sir, please. You are alive. That is what matters now. We must get you out of this water." He opened his eyes again and looked at her properly for the first time, and she felt the strange weight of being seen by someone whose seeing meant something. There was a quality to his gaze, even drained as it was, that made her sit a little straighter in the freezing mud. "Where am I?" "On the Northbridge Road, sir, 2 miles from the village of Aldwick. I am Marin Holloway. I was on my way home from delivering mending." Marin. He tried the name. The corners of his mouth lifted, only just, a ghost of what might once have been a smile. An old name. A good one. "My grandmother's, sir." "Marin," he said again, as if fixing it in his mind. Then his face contracted, and his hand came up shaking and gripped the front of her shawl with surprising strength. "There is a pain in my chest, child, a great pain. I do not think I can stand." "Then we will not stand," she said. She did not know where the calm in her voice came from. Her own heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. "There is a stone wall just there, and a hawthorn growing over it. There will be some shelter. Lean on me." She put her arm beneath his shoulders. He was lighter than she had expected, frighteningly light, all bones beneath the fine wool coat. It took her a long minute and 3 attempts, and once he cried out softly when his ribs were jarred, and the sound of it nearly undid her. But she got him out of the ditch. She got him to the lee of the stone wall, where the hawthorn made a small, dripping canopy. She unwrapped her shawl and folded it and put it under his head. The cold reached for her at once through the thin wool of her dress, and she ignored it. "Sir," she said, kneeling beside him, "I must go for help. There is a farm 1/2 mile back, the Brennick farm. They will have a cart. I will run. I will not be long." No, his gray eyes were very wide now, very awake. "No, child, you must not leave me. Sir, you need— Listen to me." His hand found hers in the mud and gripped it. His fingers were cold and thin and trembling. "If you leave me, I will die here. I know it. I have lived long enough to know when a thing has come for me. I do not want to die alone in a ditch on a road I should not have ridden. Will you stay?" Marin stared at him. The rain was finding its way through the hawthorn now. A drop ran down her cheek, and she did not know whether it was rainwater or something else. "I will stay," she said. "Thank you, Marin Holloway." She sat down properly in the mud beside him. She took his hand in both of hers, and she rubbed it slowly, the way her mother had used to rub her father's hands in the last winter of his life, when the cold went into the joints and he could not bear it. She was 20 years old, and she had never seen a man die, and she did not know if she was about to. "Tell me a thing," he said after a long while. His eyes were still closed. "Tell me anything. I should like to hear a voice that is not my own." So she told him. She told him about the mending in the basket, 3 shirts and a christening gown that the vicar's housekeeper had paid her to repair. She told him about her mother, who was at home with a cough that had not lifted since Michaelmas, and her younger brother Tobin, who was 13 and worked at the smithy after school. She told him that her father had been a schoolmaster in a village 40 miles south, and that he had died of fever when she was 16. She told him about the books her father had left behind, fewer than a dozen now, and how she read them in the evenings by the one candle they could afford. She did not know why she told him all this. She had never told anyone all this. But he lay very quiet and listened, and once he squeezed her hand to show that he was still with her, and she kept talking because his breathing was steadier when she did, and because the silence frightened her more than her own voice. "You have a kind soul, child," he whispered, after a long time. The light was going out of the sky. "You have a kind soul, and the world will try to grind it out of you, and you must not let it. Do you hear me? Do you promise?" "Sir, please don't." "Promise me. I promise." He nodded faintly. His eyes were closed again. She thought he was sleeping, and then she thought he was something worse. And then he spoke once more, very low, almost to himself. "My son will come. He always comes in the end. He's angry with me, but he will come. When he does, you must not be afraid of him. He's not what they say he is. He's only a man who has been hurt past mending." "Tell him," he did not finish. His head turned a little to the side, and his breathing slowed, and Marin held his hand and watched the last of the daylight bleed out of the western sky, and did not move, would not move, though her legs had long since gone numb beneath her. She did not hear the riders at first. The wind was loud in the hawthorn, and her ears were full of the small, terrible sound of the old man's breathing, and so she did not hear them until they were nearly upon her. The heavy drum of hooves on wet earth, the jingle of bridles, the harsh, clipped voice of a man giving orders. She raised her head. 4 horsemen had come around the bend of the road. 3 were in the dark livery of some great house, their faces hard and watchful, and the fourth rode a black horse that was steaming in the cold, and he sat his saddle the way other men sit a throne, and he wore no livery because he wore only black, and even in the failing light, Marin could see that his face was the face of a man who had ridden through something more terrible than weather. He saw her at once. He saw the old man at her feet, and the look that came into his eyes as he flung himself down from the saddle was not one Marin had words for. "Father," he said. He came across the muddy road in 3 strides, and the men behind him were already drawing weapons, and Marin did not move, did not let go of the old man's hand, because she had promised, and a promise made to a dying man was not a thing you broke for any reason in the world. The man in black knelt opposite her. He did not look at her. He looked only at the old man's face, and his hand came up and touched his father's cheek, and Marin saw that the hand was shaking. "Father," he said again, lower. "Father, I am here." The old man's eyes opened. They found his son's face, and a strange light came into them. Not surprise, only recognition, only the long-expected meeting of an old debt. His lips moved. "Linnet," the old man whispered. The single word, the name of a small singing bird. He was not speaking to either of them. He was speaking to someone who was not there. Then his eyes shifted and found Marin's, and a small, clear smile touched his mouth. "She stayed," he said, to his son. "She stayed with me, Cassian. She did not run." The man in black, Cassian, turned his head, slowly, and looked at Marin for the first time. His eyes were gray, the same gray as his father's, but harder and colder, and full of a fury so banked and so patient that Marin felt the breath go out of her chest. "Who are you?" he said. His voice was very quiet. Quiet was worse than shouting. She understood that immediately. "My name is Marin Holloway, sir. I found him in the ditch. You found him!" He said it without inflection. "And rather than ride for help, rather than fetch a doctor, rather than do any of the things a Christian person might have done, you sat in the mud with him until he—" His voice cracked, only for a syllable, and then closed again like a door. "Until he what, Miss Holloway?" "Sir, he asked me to stay. He begged me to. My father," said the man in black, "is the 7th Duke of Ravenshollow. Was. and you sat in the mud with him while he died." Behind him, the 3 liveried men had dismounted. One already had a hand on the hilt of a short sword. "Take her," said the Duke of Ravenshollow, in that same terrible, quiet voice. "I will have the truth of this before the night is out. By heaven, or I will know the reason why." The hand closed on her arm. Maren did not resist, but she did not let go of the old man's hand, not until they pried her fingers loose, one by one. And even then, she felt the cold weight of his palm against hers for hours afterward, as if the dead could leave a fingerprint on the living that no fire would ever quite warm away. They did not speak to her on the ride. She rode behind the youngest of the liveried men, side saddle and clinging, with her wet skirts plastered to her legs, and her teeth clenched so hard against their chattering that her jaw ached down into her throat. The road unwound in the dark. There were no torches. The men knew the way, as if they had ridden it 100 nights with no moon. The only sound was the steady, wet rhythm of hooves on stone, and somewhere ahead of her, the muffled breathing of the black horse the new Duke rode. She could see him only in silhouette. He had not turned to look at her since the moment by the wall. His father's body had been bound carefully in his own dark green coat and lifted onto the largest of the horses, and the Duke had ridden behind him for 1/4 of a mile, with one hand resting on his father's shoulder, the way a man might steady a sleeping child. He did not weep. She was watching for it. The estate revealed itself slowly. First an iron gatehouse, blacker than the night around it. Then a long avenue of yew trees, so old and so close grown that the lantern light seemed to move through a tunnel. Then, all at once, the house, and Maren, who had never in her life seen any house larger than the vicarage, drew in a breath that hurt her ribs. It was monstrous. There was no other word. Ravenshollow Hall rose against the night like something dreamed by a man who did not love daylight. Dark stone, 2 great wings spread back from a central tower, more windows than she could count, and only a handful of them lit. A house built to be feared, a house that had succeeded. They dismounted in a courtyard paved with black flagstones. Servants came running out, none of them speaking above a murmur, none of them meeting the new Duke's eye. He gave instructions in a low voice. "The master library. Prepare him there. Send for the chaplain. Light every candle in the east corridor." And the household moved around him the way a tide moves around a stone. A heavy hand closed on Maren's elbow. The liveried man steered her through a side door, down a flagged passage that smelled of damp and beeswax, and into a small, unheated room with a single barred window and a wooden chair set against the wall. "You will wait here," he said, and closed the door and turned the key from the outside. Maren sat in the chair and did not weep. She had decided on the road that she would not weep. She put her hands flat on her wet knees, and she breathed, slow and steady, the way her father had taught her to breathe when she was a child, afraid of the dark. Count 4 in, count 4 out. Fear is only a tenant. It cannot hold the lease. She did not know how long she sat there. At some point, she heard a great bell tolling somewhere far above her, slow and solemn, and she understood, without being told, that the bell was for the old Duke. I held his hand, she thought. Whatever else they do to me, I held his hand at the end. He did not die alone. Footsteps. The key turned in the lock, and the door opened, and she rose to her feet, because rising to one's feet was what one did. The woman in the doorway took one long look at her face and stopped dead. She was perhaps 50, tall, sparse, in plain dark wool with a set of keys hanging at her waist. Her hair was the color of wet iron, and pulled back so severely that her eyes seemed to have been made larger by it. She turned her head and snapped over her shoulder at the men behind her. "Out!" Both of you. The girl is half dead of cold, and you have her sitting in a stone room with no fire. Out. The men withdrew. The woman shut the door, almost gently, and crossed to Marin in 3 quick strides, and took her hands and turned them palm up, and made a small, sharp sound through her teeth. Child, you are blue. Sit down. She pushed Marin back into the chair and stripped off her own thick shawl and wrapped it around Marin's shoulders. I am Mrs. Kalehart. I am the housekeeper of Raven's Hollow Hall. I have been the housekeeper of Raven's Hollow Hall for 31 years. I knew the old Duke when he was younger than his grace is now. Do you understand me? Marin nodded, not trusting her voice. Mrs. Kalehart knelt, actually knelt, her good wool dress on the stone floor, and looked into Marin's face. I want you to tell me exactly what happened on that road, not what they will ask you. What happened? From the beginning. Do you hear me? Marin told her. She told her exactly as it had happened. The ditch, the old man's hand, the things he had said about his son, the last word he had spoken, which had been the name of a bird. Linnet. Mrs. Kalehart's face did not change while she listened, but at the name Linnet, something happened in her eyes that Marin did not understand then. The housekeeper closed her eyes. She drew a long breath. All right, said Mrs. Kalehart. All right. You listen to me now, Miss Holloway. His Grace is not a cruel man. I want you to remember that. But he has just lost his father, and he is the 8th. God keep us, Duke of Raven's Hollow now. And there is a thing they say about the dukes of this house, and you must understand it before he calls you in. What do they say? Marin whispered. That a Raven's Hollow has never forgiven anyone for anything. Not in 300 years. And the man who is now master of this house. Child, do you know whose father you sat with in the mud tonight? They call him the Iron Duke. They call him the Cold Hand of the North. There are men in London who will not say his name aloud after dark. And his father? Her voice broke, only for an instant. His father was the only living soul who could make him laugh. The only one. And his father is dead. And you were the last person to see him living. And God help you, child. You must tell him exactly what you have told me. And you must not flinch. And you must not lie. He will know. A bell rang somewhere in the house. Mrs. Kalehart rose to her feet, and her face closed up like a shutter. He's ready for you. Come. The 2 liveried men were waiting. Marin walked out between them into the corridor, where the candles had been lit along the entire length, and the long, polished floor stretched away into shadow toward a single tall door at the far end. God help you, girl, one of the footmen muttered, very low as they walked. Do you know whose father you have touched? She did. Now, at last, she did. The library of Raven's Hollow Hall was the largest room Marin had ever stood in. It rose 2 stories to a dark, coffered ceiling. Books lined every wall to the height of a man, and twice again, climbing up into shadow on iron galleries reached by spiral stairs. A fire as big as a doorway burned in a black marble hearth at one end. And in the center of the room, between her and the fire, the Duke of Raven's Hollow was waiting. He had changed his clothes. He no longer wore the riding coat, but a plain black coat of fine cloth, no ornament. His hair, which had been wet and wild on the road, was now combed back severely from his forehead. The fire was behind him. She could not see his face well. That, she understood, was deliberate. She did not bow. She did not curtsy. She did not know how. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, the way her mother stood at the front of the chapel, and she waited. Miss Holloway. His voice was lower than it had been on the road. The fury was banked now, but the cold was worse. Yes, Your Grace. Sit, There was a chair before her. She lowered herself into it slowly. "Look at me," he said. She looked. He had stepped a little to the side of the fire, and now she could see his face. And she understood, with a small cold shock, that he was younger than she had thought. Not above 35. The hardness of him had aged him in her mind. His features were severe, but not unhandsome. A long, straight nose, a mouth pressed into a line, a jaw that suggested a great deal of clenching. The gray eyes were still his father's, only honed. There were dark hollows beneath them that suggested he had not slept properly in a long time, and a single thin scar ran from the edge of his left eyebrow up into his hair, white against the dark. "Tell me what my father said to you." She told him. She told him of the horse the old Duke had been searching for, of the pain in his chest, of how he had begged her not to leave him. She told him of the things she had spoken aloud to fill the silence, her brother, her mother's cough, the book she still owned. She told him of the promise the old Duke had made her swear, and she told him, last, the words that had made Mrs. Kalehart's eyes fill. "He always comes, in the end. He's angry with me, but he will come." She watched his face the entire time she spoke. He did not look away. He did not move. But once, when she said, "He is not what they say he is," his jaw tightened so hard she heard the small click of his teeth. When she finished, the silence ran on for a long time. And the last thing, the last word, "Linnet, your grace." He did not move. He did not blink. "Get out," he said. She stood. "Not you, Miss Holloway. The walls. Out." A ripple ran along the room. From behind a screen at the far end of the library, a footman she had not known was there, stepped out, bowed, and withdrew. Another came down silently from the iron gallery above. A third unfolded himself from a chair in a deep alcove. She had been performing, this whole time, before an audience of 3. They went out one by one through a door she had not noticed, and the heavy door closed, and she was alone with the 8th Duke of Ravenshollow. He turned away from her. He set both hands on the marble mantel and leaned on them, his back to her. And she saw, only did not hear, his shoulders rise and fall once, very deeply. "My father," said the Duke very quietly into the fire, "had a sister. Her name was Linnet. She drowned when she was 9 years old, and he was 11, and he was meant to have been watching her. He has not spoken her name aloud in 52 years. He was speaking it to her. Do you understand? At the end. He thought he was going to her. Yes, Your Grace. You held his hand. Yes. For how long? 3 hours, Your Grace, perhaps. Until you came. The fire cracked. A log shifted and threw up a brief storm of sparks that lit the underside of his jaw. And she saw clearly now, for one instant, that his face was wet. He had turned his back so that she would not see, but the firelight had betrayed him. Maren looked at her hands. She gave him the small mercy of pretending she had not seen. When he spoke again, his voice was perfectly steady. My father rode out this morning after a quarrel with me. He wished to go to a bailiff who was dying, an old man named Calder, who served him faithfully for 40 years. I told him he was not strong enough. I told him the weather was foul. He went anyway. He has been. He stopped. He was always more stubborn than I am. He ordered the grooms not to follow him. They obeyed him because he was their duke. I rode out the moment I learned. I rode for 6 hours. And I came around the bend of the Northbridge Road, Miss Holloway, and I saw a girl in a gray dress kneeling in the mud beside my father's body. And he stopped. He pressed the heels of his hands against the marble. I thought you had robbed him, he said quietly. I thought you were a thief. I had ridden through 6 hours of rain believing he was alive, and I came around that bend, And I saw you, and I thought, God forgive me. I thought you had taken from him what little he had left to take. I was wrong. Mrs. Kalehart has told me what you told her. I have just listened to you say it again, and I have watched your face while you said it, and I know that you were not lying, because no one has ever lied to me about my father, and looked the way you looked when you spoke of him. He liked you. He told me so. With his last breath, he told me so. I will not forget that, Miss Holloway. She nodded. It was the only thing she could do. He turned, finally. Whatever was on his face, he had got it back under his control. I find myself with a debt I cannot pay. I cannot give my father back another hour of life. But you came in your wet clothes, in the dark, between my men with their swords half drawn, and you sat in my library and told me the truth, though it cost you, and I will not let you walk out of here tonight and back to a cold cottage and an ill mother and a debt at the chandler's. You will stay in this house. You will be given a room and a fire and a hot meal. In the morning, when I have my mind under me again, we will speak of what is owed to you. You will not refuse. She found her voice. It was small, but it was hers. Your Grace, my mother does not know where I am. She is ill. If she wakes in the night and finds me gone, a rider will be at her door within the hour. He will carry whatever message you wish to send. He will carry money. He will carry food and a doctor, if a doctor is needed. And he will tell her that her daughter has been the guest of this house for one night out of grief and gratitude. Will you write to her now? Yes, Your Grace. He nodded once, the smallest motion, and rang the bell pull. Mrs. Kalehart had been waiting. Instructions were given in a low, fast voice. The blue room, hot water, a rider for Aldwych within the half hour. When the housekeeper had gone, the Duke turned back to Marin. One more thing, Miss Holloway. My father, did he give you anything? Said anything, in the last hours, that he wished given to me or kept from me? Think carefully. He was not a man to die without arrangements, she thought. The cold and the hours had loosened something in her memory. She went back over the long gray afternoon under the hawthorn. He had given her nothing. He had only made her promise to keep her own kindness, and he had spoken the name of a drowned child 52 years gone, and he had said— She stopped. Miss Holloway, he said, tell him, just before you came. He said tell him, and he did not finish. I do not know what he meant me to tell you. I am sorry, Your Grace. I do not know. The Duke stood very still. Tell him, he repeated. Yes, Your Grace. He looked at her then, properly looked at her, the way his father had in the last clear minute beneath the hawthorn, as if her face were a thing he meant to remember. And for the first time since she had seen him in the road, something moved in his gray eyes that was not fury, and not grief, and not iron. It was something smaller and more dangerous than any of those things. It was attention. Go to bed, Miss Holloway. Mrs. Kalehart will take you. We will speak in the morning. She walked to the door. Her hand was on the latch when his voice came again, lower, almost as if speaking to himself. He has not been wrong about a person in 40 years. She did not turn. She opened the door and went out into the candlelit corridor, where Mrs. Kalehart stood waiting, and she did not look back at the man by the fire, but she felt his eyes on her until the door closed between them, and she felt them, faintly, for a long time after. The blue room was not blue. The walls were a soft, pale gray-green, and the bed was hung with curtains of heavy cream wool. A fire had already been lit. A copper bath had been brought in and was being filled by 2 silent maids. A nightgown of fine white linen lay folded across the bed, and there was a tray on the small round table with a domed silver lid. And Maren caught the smell of broth and bread, and her stomach contracted so sharply she had to put one hand against the doorframe. "In, child," said Mrs. Cailhart behind her. "Don't stand staring. Mary, Beth, go on now. I will see to her myself." The maids curtsied and went out. Mrs. Cailhart shut the door and turned the key. "Why am I locked in?" "You are not locked in. I am locked in with you. There is a difference. The household is in confusion tonight, and I will not have a maid wander into this corridor and see things she will speak of in the kitchens by morning. Out of those clothes." Maren went behind the screen. Her fingers shook on the laces of her bodice. She stepped into the water, and the heat of it went up her body in a wave, and the breath came out of her in a small, involuntary sound. She washed. When she rose at last, Mrs. Cailhart wrapped her in a great warm towel and rubbed her dry the way one might rub a child, brisk and impersonal, and somehow very kind. Then the nightgown. Then she was guided to the chair by the fire, and the tray was set on her lap. "Eat. All of it." Maren ate. The broth was beef and barley. The bread was still warm. There was a small dish of stewed pears, and a glass of something dark and sweet that Mrs. Cailhart said was elderberry cordial. She ate until her stomach hurt, and somewhere in the middle of it, her eyes began to fill, and she could not stop them. "Don't, child. You have a long road ahead of you, and you will need every drop. I do not know what is happening, Mrs. Cailhart, nor do any of us just yet. Will I go home tomorrow?" A small pause. "I do not know, Miss Holloway." Maren set the spoon down. What did he mean when he said he has not been wrong about a person in 40 years? Mrs. Cailhart was silent for a long moment. The old Duke had a gift for reading people, child, a very particular gift. He could sit across a table from a man and know within the soup course whether he was honest. He could meet a girl in a hallway and know within 3 sentences what she was made of. In 50 years, Miss Holloway, he was never once wrong. Not once. The household used to speak of it. He would say, "That man will betray his brother before the year is out." And a year later, we would hear of it, and we would shake our heads, and we would say, "The old Duke knew." She paused. Tonight, before he died, in a wet ditch on a road he should not have ridden, he looked at you, and he told his son. She stayed with me. She did not run. That was not a sentence about a road. That was a sentence about your soul, and His grace knows it. And His grace, who has not believed in his Father's gift for years, is sitting alone in that library tonight, trying to decide what to do about it. Maren stared at the fire. I do not see why any of this should fall on me. I am 20 years old, and I deliver mending. Yes, child. And I am 61, and I run a house of 50 servants. And tonight, I have laid out a body for the 2nd time in this family in 9 years, and I don't see either. We are required only to do the next right thing. Eat your pears. Maren ate. After a while, there was a tapping at the door, and Mrs. Cailhart returned with a folded paper. From His grace. He has written to your mother. He thought you might wish to see what he has said before the writer goes. Maren unfolded the paper. The handwriting was black and decisive. Madam, your daughter is safe. She is the guest of Ravenshollow Hall tonight by my request, and shall be returned to you tomorrow. She has shown my late father, in the last hours of his life, a kindness for which this house owes her a debt that cannot be measured. Please accept the enclosed as the first small acknowledgement of it. A doctor will attend you within the hour. You are not to refuse him. Your servant, Ravenshollow. Maren read it twice. Send it, please. Mrs. Cailhart took the letter and a small, heavy purse from a fold of her apron and went out. The lock turned again. Marin sat very still in the firelight, and she thought of her mother lying in the cold cottage, and of a stranger's rider arriving in the dark with a doctor and a purse, and she put her hands over her face, and she did weep. Then, properly weep. When Mrs. Cailhart returned, Marin was already in the great soft bed under the cream wool curtains. "His Grace has asked," said the housekeeper from the door, "if you would walk in the long gallery with him after breakfast tomorrow. He will not press if you are not equal to it." Marin did not answer at once. She lay in the dark, and at last she said, "Tell him I will walk." "Yes, Miss Holloway." The door closed. The key turned. The house held its breath above her, around her, beneath her. 600 years of stone, and a body laid out somewhere in another wing, and a man alone in a library, and a girl in a borrowed bed who had walked out of her own life that morning to deliver 3 shirts and a christening gown, and had not, it seemed, walked back into it yet. She woke before the house did. The light at the window was still gray, the fire down to its last red eye. She lay very still and watched the curtain move in some draught she could not feel. A maid had laid out a dress on the chair by the fire. Dark gray wool, very plain, very well made, with a soft white linen collar and small bone buttons, a pair of stockings, a pair of slippers, a clean shift, a single dark ribbon for her hair. There was a folded note pinned to the sleeve, in a different hand from the Duke's. "Miss Holloway, this was Mary Cailhart's, who served here as a young woman 30 years ago, and was of your size. It is plain, but clean and warm. Wear it without shame. It has not been worn since she married, and she would be glad of it." A.C. Mrs. Cailhart's daughter, Marin, understood. She held the note for a long minute. She dressed slowly. The wool was finer than anything she had owned. She brushed her hair out by the fire and tied it back with the ribbon, and looked at herself for a moment in the small, dim glass above the mantel, and did not entirely recognize the woman who looked back. She turned away quickly, a scratch at the door. A young maid who curtsied and would not meet her eye, and said in a small, frightened voice that breakfast was laid in the small east room. The corridor she had walked in candlelight last night was hung with portraits, and she did not look at any of them. The girl led her down 2 flights of carpeted stairs, along a passage hung with dark green paper and lit by tall windows that showed a wet gray lawn outside, and at last to a door which she opened and then withdrew, curtsying again. Marin stepped inside. It was a small room, a breakfast table set for 2 by a window that looked out on a walled garden. The Duke was already there, standing at the window, with his hands clasped behind his back. He did not turn. "Sit, Miss Holloway." She sat. There was tea already poured at her place. "Did you sleep?" "Yes, Your Grace. Thank you." "I did not." He turned. The light from the window caught his face, and she saw what last night's fire had hidden. The dark hollows beneath his eyes had deepened, and his hair, severely combed last night, had a single disordered strand at his temple, where his hand had passed through it once too often. "Eat," he said. "I will not pretend to make conversation. I am poor company this morning." She ate. He watched the garden. After a long while, he came to the table and sat opposite her, but he did not eat. He poured himself a cup of tea, drank none of it, and turned the cup slowly in its saucer. "My father will be buried on Friday, in the family chapel here. There will be many people, speeches, a great deal of formality of the kind he himself despised. None of it will resemble the man who died yesterday, on a wet road in a borrowed coat, looking for his horse." He glanced up at her. "I tell you this so that you understand. The man you sat with in the mud, and the 7th Duke of Ravenshollow, were not entirely the same person. The first was my father. The second was an office. We will bury the office on Friday. Almost no one will mourn the first. You will, Your Grace. He looked at her. He did not answer. Walk with me. I cannot bear another minute of this room. The long gallery ran the entire length of the south wing. A polished oak floor. Tall windows along one side that flooded the space with gray northern light. And along the other side, a procession of portraits stretching back 300 or 400 years. They walked slowly. The space between them was perhaps 2 feet, and it felt every step like a thing being measured. Tell me something. When my father said to you the world will try to grind it out of you, and you mustn't let it, what did you understand him to mean? Marin considered. That I am poor, Your Grace, and a woman, and that the world is not generally kind to either of those things. He saw my hands, I think. He saw the basket. He guessed the rest. He was warning me that I would be tempted, in time, to become harder than I am, in order to survive, and he was asking me not to. And shall you obey him? I shall try. Why? She stopped walking. He stopped a step later and turned. Because he asked me, Your Grace. Because he was dying, and he asked me, and a thing asked of a person at that hour is a thing I do not know how to refuse. I am not certain I can keep the promise. I expect the world will indeed try, and I expect it may succeed. But I shall try. That is the whole of my answer. He looked at her for a long moment. It is the answer I was looking for. Walk on, Miss Holloway. They walked. He stopped eventually before one of the portraits, a man in dark green, perhaps 50, with gray eyes and a mouth that was almost on the point of smiling. My father. Painted 7 years ago. It was and was not the man she had held in the rain. He looks well, Your Grace. He was well then. He was never quite well after my mother died. That was 4 years ago. The fall took the rest. He never fully recovered from the fall. The fall, Your Grace? In the spring, from a horse. He was 68 years old, and I had told him 100 times that he was past riding the high country. He broke 3 ribs and his collarbone, and something in his hip that the doctors could never quite name. Yesterday, he rode out for the first time in 5 months to see Calder, who has been his bailiff for 40 years and is now dying. My father insisted no one else should be the last face he saw. I tried to forbid him. He laughed and went anyway. He stopped. Marin looked at the portrait. She thought of the laudanum smell that had been on the old man's breath. Your Grace, may I ask you something? Yes. Why am I here this morning? Why are you walking me through your gallery? I am a girl from a cottage who delivered 3 shirts to the vicarage yesterday. I do not understand. He turned from the portrait and looked at her. The gray eyes were tired, but they were clear. Neither do I, Miss Holloway. I have not yet decided. My father told me at the end that you stayed, and I find that I want to know why. Not the reason you have already given Mrs. Keelhart and myself, which was the truth. I want to know the older reason, the reason underneath. I have lived among great families all my life. I have been to courts and assemblies full of women who would have walked past my father in his ditch and pretended not to see. I want to know what makes a person not do that. I want to know it because my father is dead, and I will never ask him another question in this world. And you are the last person who spoke to him. He stopped. He had said more than he had intended to say. I am sorry, Your Grace. I do not have another hour of him to give you. I have what I have already told you. There is one thing more, perhaps, but I do not know if it is what you wish to hear. Tell me. He spoke of you, Your Grace, before the end. He said you would come, that you always came in the end, that you were angry with him, but you would come. And he said, she paused, because she wanted to be exact. He said that you were not what they say you are. Those were his words. He is not what they say he is. He is only a man who has been hurt, past mending. And then he said, tell him. And he could not finish. I have been thinking all night about what he meant me to tell you. I think, tell him was the whole of it. I think he wanted me to tell you that he had said that of you, out loud, to another person. That was the message. He had gone very still. Miss Holloway, he said, very low. You have done me a kindness this morning that I do not think you understand. Your Grace, walk back with me. We have been here long enough. They walked back. At the door, he stopped and turned, and she saw that he had got his face under his control once more, the iron of him drawn close. You will go home this afternoon. I shall send you in a carriage with Mrs. Kalehart, who will see your mother and arrange for proper care. There will be a sum of money. You will not refuse it. After my father is buried, in perhaps a fortnight, I will send for you again. There is a matter I would like to discuss with you that I am not yet able to speak of. I ask only that you not refuse to come when I send. Will you give me that? Yes, Your Grace. I will come when you send. Thank you. He bowed to her, very slightly, and turned and walked away down the long gallery, and she watched his straight, black-coated back until it passed through the door at the far end, and only then did she breathe. It was 11 days before the writer came. In those 11 days, a great many things happened in the cottage at Aldwych, and almost all of them were astonishing. A doctor came on the first morning, and again on the third, and again on the 7th. Coal was delivered, 2 sacks of flour, a side of bacon, a length of woolen cloth that was enough for a winter cloak each for Marin and her mother and Tobin. The cottage roof, which had leaked since August, was repaired in a single afternoon. A bookshop in York sent a parcel addressed to Miss M. Holloway, Aldwych, containing 6 volumes, Cowper's poems, a Defoe, a translation of Homer, a small worn Shakespeare, and 2 books of sermons her father would have loved, with a card inside that said only, per the late Duke's wishes. Her mother wept the morning the books came. Your father, she said, would have given his right hand to own this. And Marin said nothing. The village noticed. The vicar's housekeeper came by on the 2nd day with a marrow in her hand, as a pretext, and asked very directly what had happened. And Marin told her, very directly, that she had found an old gentleman in the road, had stayed with him because he asked her to, and that he had turned out to be the father of the Duke of Ravenshollow. The story spread. By the end of the week, the village had settled into a wary kind of awe. Tobin was full of questions. He was 13, and he had heard of the Duke of Ravenshollow, the way boys hear of ogres. I have heard, Tobin said, that he wounded a man in a duel at Cambridge for saying something foul about a girl, and that his father gave him the sword for his 16th birthday, and he keeps it on the wall above the great fireplace. Marin told him not to repeat such things. Her mother spoke very little of any of it. She asked Marin once, on the 4th evening, "Child, are you afraid?" And Marin had said, "No, Mama," and her mother had looked at her over the rim of her teacup and had said, "I think you are not." And I think that is the strangest thing of all. On the morning of the 12th day, the writer came. He presented Marin with a folded letter sealed with black wax. The seal showed a raven over a tower. His Grace asks if you would be ready to travel within the hour, miss. I am to wait, with a chaise, at the foot of the lane. Marin took the letter inside. Her mother was at the table. Marin broke the seal. Miss Holloway, forgive the brevity. The matter of which I spoke when we walked has now reached the point at which I require your help, if you are willing to give it. I will explain in person. The chaise will bring you to Raven's Hollow this afternoon. You shall be lodged in the same room and treated with every consideration. Mrs. Kalehart sends her regards. I would be deeply obliged. Raven's Hollow. Marin read it twice. She looked at her mother across the table. Her mother looked back at her without surprise. Go, her mother said. Mama. Go, child. He has asked. It is owed. Her mother set down her cup. But Marin, listen to me a moment. I have had 11 days to think about this. I know what such things mean, and what they do not mean. You must understand a thing before you go back into that house. Will you listen? I am listening, Mama. This man, the new Duke, he's not making you a gift. He's paying a debt. There is a difference. He does not yet know what he owes you exactly, because he does not yet know what you held for his father in the last hour. He is feeling his way toward it. You went into that ditch, child, as a girl who delivered mending. You came out of it as something else. I do not know yet what. I do not think he knows yet what. But he is going to find out, and you are going to find out with him. And I want you to remember, Marin, look at me. Whatever you held for his father, you do not owe it to his son. Do you hear me? You owe it only to yourself. The kindness is yours. The promise was yours. The hand that held was yours. He may be grateful for it. He may pay for it. He may even, in time, ask you for more of it. And if you choose to give it, that is your choice. But the thing itself is yours. Some men, when they meet a thing they have not seen before, want to put it in a glass case and own it. Do not be put in a glass case, child. Promise me. I promise, Mama. Her mother nodded once and was quiet. Marin packed in 20 minutes. She put on the gray wool dress that had been Mary Kylehart's. She wrapped her hair in the dark ribbon. She kissed Tobin and her mother and went down the lane to the chaise. Mrs. Kylehart was waiting on the steps. She did not smile. But she took Marin's hands in both of hers, briefly, before letting them go. He is waiting in the small library this time, the housekeeper said, walking briskly beside her into the house. Not the great one. The small one is on the south side, where his father used to read. He does not use it. He has been using it for the last 3 days. I do not know what to make of it. Mrs. Kalehart, is he well? The housekeeper did not answer at once. At the door of a room at the end of a passage hung with fox-hunting portraits, she stopped, her hand resting briefly on the latch. He has not slept above 3 hours together since his father died. He does not eat unless I send something up and stand over him. He took his father's coffin to the chapel by himself, on his own shoulders, with 3 men of the household, when the undertaker tried to bring a hearse. The household has been afraid to come near him. She paused. Yesterday, after the funeral, he sat at his father's desk for 6 hours. And at the end of those 6 hours, he rang for me and said, "Send for the girl." That is all. Send for the girl. And I came down those stairs, child, and I sent the rider with the letter. And I knew, the moment I sent it, that something is beginning here. I do not know what. But I would have you know it before you go in. Are you ready? Yes. Then in you go. She opened the door. The small library was a warm room, paneled in dark wood, lined with books on 3 sides, and with a fire burning in a small grate. The 4th wall held a single great window onto a kitchen garden gone half to seed. There were 2 deep armchairs by the fire and a small writing desk under the window. And at the desk, the Duke of Ravenshollow was sitting, his head bent over a paper, his coat off and laid over the back of the chair, his white linen shirt open at the throat. She had never seen him without his coat. It made him a different man, smaller, more tired, more mortal. He looked up when she came in. He set the pen down carefully. He stood. and Marin saw that he was thinner than he had been 11 days ago. "Miss Holloway, thank you for coming." "Your Grace." Mrs. Kalehart withdrew. The door closed. They were alone. "I shall come to the point. After you left this house 11 days ago, I went into my father's rooms. I had not been able to enter them before. On the night you left, I went in, and I sat at his desk, and I went through his papers." He paused. "There was an envelope, Miss Holloway, sealed, addressed in my father's hand. Lying on top of the blotter where it could not be missed, the instruction on it was very clear. To be opened by my son in the event of my death, and inside it," he stopped. He looked up at her. Inside it was a letter that named you, by name. Marin Holloway, of Oldwick. It was dated the morning of his death. He had written it before he rode out. He had written it as though he knew, somehow, what was coming. He had written you into a letter on the last morning of his life, before he had ever met you. Do you understand what I am saying to you?" Marin stared at him. "No, Your Grace." "I do not." He crossed the room and took the envelope from a small drawer in the writing desk and brought it to her and held it out. And she took it because she did not know what else to do. The seal had been broken. "I have read it once. I shall not read it again until you have. It is yours. He left it for me to give you, in the event he was not able to give it himself. I would ask you to read it here, while I am present, because there are things in it that require both of us. After that, I would ask you a question. You may take whatever time you need. I shall stand by the window. I shall not watch your face." He walked to the window and stood with his back to her. Marin looked down at the envelope in her lap. Her hands were shaking. She thought of her mother's voice across the kitchen table that morning. "Do not be put in a glass case, child." She drew a long breath. She did not feel like a girl in a glass case. She felt like a girl in a small, warm room with a fire and a duke at the window and the last words of a dead man in her lap. And she felt, beneath all of it, a strange, clear certainty that whatever was in this envelope, she had been meant to read it. The old duke had not been wrong about a person in 40 years. She unfolded the letter. The letter was 4 pages, written in a fine, close hand that did not waste space, to Marin Holloway, of Aldwick, who has not yet read this and may never, or who has read it, and is even now in my son's library, and is afraid. She made a small sound. At the window, the Duke did not move. If you are reading this, child, then I have been right about a thing I have hoped for years to be wrong about, which is that I should not see another spring. I have known for some months that I was going. The doctors have not told me. The doctors have told no one but my own bones. I did not choose to share this with my son, because my son is a man who, when given a thing to grieve in advance, will grieve it twice, and he has grieved enough in this life. I have ridden out today, in foul weather, against his wishes, because there is a man named Calder who has served me for 40 years, and who will be in his grave by the week's end, and I will not let him go without a face he knows. If I do not return, and I have a strong sense I shall not, then this letter will be found. I am writing to you, Marin Holloway, because I have not yet met you, and I shall meet you today on a road that runs between Aldwick and the moor. I cannot tell you how I know this. I do not know it the way a man knows the road home. I know it the way a man knows when he wakes that he has been dreaming of his mother. There is a quality of certainty about it that I cannot defend and will not try. You will be in a gray dress. You will have a basket. You will kneel down in a ditch beside an old man you do not know, and you will stay with him. Child, you will stay, because I have known your face since the night I dreamed of you in August. And I have known what you are made of since long before that. Do not be frightened. I am not asking anything of you. I am writing to give you, and to give my son, certain things he will need, and you will need, in the days that come after. Marin stopped. She lifted her head. Your Grace, was your father? Was he in the habit of dreaming? Said the Duke without turning. Yes. He believed it was a curse the family had bought from God in exchange for some sin too old to remember. He was never wrong. Read on, please. She read on. My son is not what they say he is. You will already know this if you have spoken with him. The world has been wrong about my son for 15 years. I have not been able to correct it. He has not been able to correct it. He will not let me try. I am dying with this thing undone, Marin, and I am asking you, I am only asking, you may refuse, to be in his life for a little while, in such manner as the two of you can together arrange, so that he may have one person who saw him true before I went. To this end, I have made arrangements. Attached to this letter is a note to my steward. He is instructed upon my death to settle upon you and your mother an annuity of £150 per annum in perpetuity, charged against the Aldwych portion of the estate. This is not a payment, child. I do not pay for what cannot be paid for. It is a freedom. With it, you will not need to deliver mending in the rain. With it, your mother will have a fire all winter, and your brother will go to the school in York if he wishes. He cannot revoke it. Even he cannot, because I have written it so. Do not refuse it. I am dead. You cannot be too proud to take a thing from a dead man. The second arrangement is this. I have asked Mrs. Kalehart, who has loved my son properly for 30 years, to find an honest pretext under which you may stay at Ravenshollow some part of each month for the next year. I have suggested that she discover, quite suddenly, that my private library of agricultural papers is in disarray and requires cataloging by a young woman of education. You read, Marin. Take the position. Live half the month at Ravenshollow and half at home. Do not move into the house entirely. You will lose yourself if you do. But come, sit in the small library where I am writing this now, where my son will find this letter. Do not love him, Marin, until you are sure. He is not a project. He is not a wounded animal to be saved. You are too good to be wasted on a man who is not equal to you. But sit with him. Read. Talk. Disagree with him. He is starved of disagreement. Be exactly the girl you are. I am tired, child. The hand grows uncertain. I shall finish. One last thing. To my son. Cassian, I have spent my life trying to teach you that you are loved, and you have spent your life refusing to believe it. I am sorry. I am sorry I did not do it better. I am sorry I have left you alone in a house where the walls have been calling you the Iron Duke for so long that you have come to think it is your name. It is not your name. Your name is Cassian Allard, and you are my son, and your mother loved you to the bottom of her heart, and I love you more than I have ever known how to say aloud. I have given Marin Holloway this letter because I trust her to carry the saying of it for me. Listen to her, my dear boy. She does not lie. She cannot lie. Do not frighten her away. Do not pay her too much. Do not try to make her into a lady. She is already a lady, in the only way that finally matters, and the rest is scaffolding. Let her sit in the small library and catalog my papers, and pour her tea, and do not be the man you think you are obliged to be when you are alone with her. Be the boy who used to ride beside me on the moor and ask why the curlews cry. He's still in there, Cassian. I have heard him in the silences all these years. Let him out a little. I love you, my son. I am going now to find Lynette and your mother. They will both scold me for being late. Your father, Ravenshollow, the seventh of that name, who in the end was only Henry, and was glad of it. Marin laid the letter down upon her lap. She did not weep. A strange, clear stillness came over her, of the kind that comes after a long fever has broken. Your Grace. He turned. She found that she could look at him. The letter had given her a kind of permission. His face was wet again, and this time he had not even tried to hide it. He knew, said Marin. Yes, he knew, and he wrote. And he wrote out anyway. Yes. Why? The Duke moved away from the window. He came and sat in the armchair opposite hers, slowly, like a man whose joints hurt. Because he was a Ravenshollow. Because Calder had served him for 40 years. Because there was a thing he had promised, and he kept his promises. Because, I think also because he had decided that he wanted his death to be of use to me. He has arranged the whole of it, Miss Holloway. He has arranged you. He has arranged Mrs. Calehart. He has arranged the cataloging. He has— a small sound escaped him, almost a laugh. He has arranged my entire next year, from a ditch on the Northbridge Road, with a letter written before breakfast. He was the most stubborn man in England. He has died as he lived. Of course he knew. Your Grace, Cassian, he said, if you can. Not in front of others. In front of others, I am Ravenshollow, and shall be for the rest of my life. But here, in this room, today, after that letter, call me by my name, please. Once, so that I have heard it spoken in this house by someone other than the dead. She looked at him. Cassian, she said. He closed his eyes. Only for a moment. Thank you. Marin. She set the letter aside. He has asked me to catalog his papers. Half a month here, half a month at home. I have read what he wrote. I should like to ask you, Your Grace, what you wish. I have told you to call me Cassian. What you wish. The wish in the letter was his. I am not bound by it, and you are not bound by it, and I should like to know your wish, in your own words, before either of us makes a thing of his. He looked at her for a long moment. My wish is that you take the position. My wish is that you sit in this room and sort his papers, and that I sit and hear with you sometimes when I have an hour, and that you tell me, by degrees, the things he said to you on the road. My wish is that I should not be alone in this house for the next year, Marin Holloway. That is my wish. I have not had that wish granted in any house I have lived in for a long time. But you have asked, and I am answering. She nodded. Then I shall take the position, on the terms your father has set. Half a month here, half at home. I shall not be a fixture in this house. I shall come, and I shall work, and I shall sit with you when you have an hour, and I shall go home when the half-month is up. We shall see, Cassian, what becomes of it. He bowed his head. Thank you. Marin. The fire cracked in the grate. Outside the window, somewhere, a single bell began to toll the hour, and the sound of it filled the small library and slowly faded. And they sat across from one another by the fire, and neither of them spoke for a long while, and neither of them needed to. But that night, walking back to the blue room behind a maid with a candle, Marin passed a corridor she had not passed before, and from the far end of it, she heard, quite clearly, the voice of a woman, high, light, beautifully modulated, on saying, "Of course Cassian will see me. Cassian always sees me. I shall wait." And though Marin could not see the speaker, she felt the cold prickle of warning along her arms, and she walked on, faster, and did not look back. The woman's name, she learned the next morning at breakfast, was Lady Sabra Vane. It was Mrs. Calehart who told her, sitting opposite her in the small east room with her hands folded primly on the table. She has been here since last night, Miss Holloway. She rode in unannounced after dark. His Grace did not summon her. He rarely does. And yet she comes. She has been coming for 3 years. Her father is the Earl of Marwen, whose lands border ours to the south. She has decided, and I use the word decided on purpose, child, that she will be the next Duchess of Ravens Hollow. She is very beautiful, Miss Holloway. She is very clever. She has the manners of an angel and the patience of a hunting cat. I am telling you this now because you will meet her this morning. She has heard of you. She has heard of the cataloging arrangement. She has asked, very sweetly, if she might be presented to the dear creature who was such a comfort to His Grace's father at the end. Those are her words. I see. Do you? I think so, Mrs. Cailhart. Then I shall not insult you with further explanation, only, she will be entirely charming. She will compliment your dress and ask you about your mother, and find some small kind way to remind you that you are a girl who delivered mending 2 weeks ago, and she is the daughter of an earl. Do not bristle. Do not match her. Be exactly who you are. She will not know what to do with that, because no one has ever simply been themselves at her, and that, child, is your one advantage. I understand. Good. She is in the morning room. His Grace will be there. He thought it better to do it in the open, and be done with it, than to have her hunt you through the corridors for a fortnight. Drink your tea, child. You will need it. The morning room was full of pale November light, and at the center of that light was Lady Sabra Vane. She was fair, ash-blonde hair drawn back simply but flatteringly, skin the color of fresh cream, a long, graceful neck rising out of a high-necked wine-colored riding habit. Her eyes were a clear pale blue, her mouth was small and at rest, and very faintly amused. The Duke stood by the fire. He was again in the black coat. Marwen saw the moment she entered that he had put a kind of armor back on. Lady Sabra rose. Miss Holloway, how wonderful! I am Sabra Vane. I have been longing to meet you. May I? She took Marwen's hands before Marwen could decide whether to give them. Her grip was soft and brief and perfectly practiced. Up close, her eyes took in Marwen. The dress, the ribbon, the work-roughened hands, in one swift, kind, devastating sweep. Such a face. Such a dear, honest face. Cassian has told me everything, what little he can bear to tell, and I have wept over it. Truly, I have. To think of a girl your age, alone on that horrid road with poor dear Henry, I cannot imagine. I should have fainted. I should have been useless. But you stayed. I called you a heroine when Cassian told me, and I shan't take it back. Sit, please. Marwen sat. So did Lady Sabra. The Duke did not. Tea, Miss Holloway? No? Are you sure? You look quite chilled. We shall have to find you something warmer to wear about the house. Mrs. Cailhart has been remiss. Cassian, has she not? Miss Holloway is suitably dressed, said the Duke quietly. Of course she is, my dear. Of course. I only meant for the corridors. Lady Sabra turned the full sweet light of her attention back on Marwen. Now, you must tell me about the cataloging. I think it is delightful of Cassian to give you such a project. So thoughtful. You read, then? I had imagined. Well, Aldwych is such a small place, isn't it? My father was a schoolmaster, Marwen said. Was he? How charming. He died when I was 16. Oh, my dear, how dreadful. Lady Sabra's eyes moistened, on cue, exactly the right amount. Cassian has been so generous. He is generous to a fault, you know. We shall have to watch him, we two, or he shall give the whole estate away to deserving cases. Shan't we, Cassian? Yes, Sabra. He says yes to everything I say, Lady Sabra confided, leaning toward Marwen. It is a great failing of his. I have been trying to cure him of it for years. Sabra, said the Duke, The single word was not loud, but Lady Sabra's smile froze, very faintly, for 1 second. Then it warmed again. "I am only teasing you, my dear. Miss Holloway will think me dreadful." She turned back to Marin. "You shall stay through Christmas, then?" "I do hope so. We are to have a small gathering on the 20th, only 30 or so. Cassian is dragging me through it under protest. You must be there." "Lady Sabra is very kind," said Marin, "but I shall be at home by then. I am not staying through Christmas. I work here only half the month." A flicker. The first one. Quickly mastered. Half the month. How interesting an arrangement. Whose idea was that, I wonder? "Mine," said Marin. Lady Sabra's pale eyes rested on her for 1 second longer than was comfortable. Then she laughed, a small, clear silver laugh, and tapped Marin lightly on the wrist. "How sensible you are." Cassian. Is she not the most sensible creature? Miss Holloway is to be respected for her arrangements, Sabra, not admired for them. They are her own. Lady Sabra blinked, only once. "Of course, my dear. Of course they are." The conversation moved on to lighter things. The weather, a horse Lady Sabra had recently bought, and Marin sat through the rest of it with her hands folded and her face composed. Twice she felt the Duke's eyes on her and did not lift her own to meet them. After perhaps 20 minutes, Lady Sabra rose, kissed the Duke on the cheek with the easy familiarity of a woman who had done it often, pressed Marin's hand once more, and swept from the room in a faint scent of violets. The door closed. The Duke and Marin did not speak for some time. At last he said, without turning, "I am sorry." "For what, Your Grace?" "For that. For what she said. For what she meant. For having permitted it under my roof. For having permitted her under my roof for as long as I have. I have been negligent in that matter for 3 years, because it was easier than refusing her plainly. You have been made to sit through a cup of tea with a woman who was measuring you for a coffin the entire time. I am sorry, Marin." "She did not measure me for a coffin, Cassian," Marin said quietly. "She measured me for a glass case." He turned from the fire. "What did you say?" "My mother told me yesterday morning, before I came, that some people, when they meet a thing they have not seen before, want to put it in a glass case and own it. Lady Sabra, I think, has not yet decided whether I am a thing or not. She is reserving judgment. If she decides I am, she will try to put me in a case. I am telling you this so that you know, Cassian, that I see her. I see her clearly. You do not need to apologize for her. You do, however, need to decide what you are going to do about her. She is not my problem. She is yours. I shall come and catalog your father's papers, and I shall sit with you by the fire, and I shall not be in the least afraid of her. But she is yours." He looked at her. "Yes, I understand." "Good. Marin, will you walk with me? In the gallery? There is a thing I should like to say, and I cannot say it sitting in this room she has just left." She rose. They walked again in the long gallery. He walked more slowly this time. After a long while, he said, "My father wrote in that letter that I was not to make you into a project. He knew me well enough to know I would try. I have been thinking about it. I have been thinking that he meant the opposite as well, that you must not make me into one either. You have just told me Lady Sabra is my problem. You are right. I shall deal with her. But I want you to understand that I am not asking you to be the cure for any of this. Not for her. Not for the loneliness my father wrote of. Not for the things they say of me in London. I am not going to lay any of that at your feet, Marin. I cannot promise I shall always succeed at it. I am out of practice at not laying things at people's feet. But I am going to try. You are not a remedy. You are a person. I want you to come and catalog the papers because I want your company, not because I want to be saved by it. Do you understand the difference? Yes, Cassian. Good. He stopped walking. Then we have understood one another twice in 2 days. That is a great deal more than most people manage in a life. They walked on, and as they reached the end of the gallery, where the great window looked out over the south lawn, Marin saw, far below, a small, slender figure in a wine-colored riding habit, standing very still on the gravel sweep, looking up at the window. And though she was too far to be sure, she had the distinct impression that Lady Sabra Vane was looking up at the two of them, side by side at the gallery window, and that her face, for one unguarded moment, was not amused at all. The cataloging began in the first week of December, and for a while it was the happiest Marin had ever been. She rode out from Aldwych on the 3rd of the month and arrived at Ravenshollow by afternoon, and Mrs. Cailhart had the small library prepared, the writing desk cleared, a second desk brought in for her, a great cabinet of old papers wheeled to the center of the room, a fresh fire, fresh ink, a clean ledger bound in green calf. She worked alone in the mornings, while the Duke was occupied with estate business. He came in for an hour after dinner each day, and sat in the armchair by the fire, and read whatever she put into his hands. The papers were a marvel and a sorrow. Letters from his mother, written in a young woman's hand 30 years before. Agricultural notes in the old Duke's hand. A half-finished memoir, abandoned 3 chapters in. A packet of letters tied in faded ribbon that turned out to be from the long-drowned linnet, written when she was 7 and 8, in a careful child's hand, addressed to her dear brother Henry. They read them together one afternoon, and when they were finished, he sat for a long time and did not speak, and then he said only, "He kept these for 60 years, Marin," and she put her hand on his sleeve, and that was all. Once they walked on the south terrace in a thin, cold sunshine, and he showed her the place where he had broken his arm at 9, falling out of an apple tree. He told her a story about his mother that made him laugh, actually laugh, a short, startled laugh. And Marin thought, walking back, that she had not heard him laugh before. She went home for the second half of December. She passed Christmas with her mother and Tobin in the cottage with the smoking chimney, and the cottage was warm now. On Christmas Eve, the Duke sent a hamper of such generosity that her mother wept and then laughed and then said, "He is courting you, child, and he does not know it, and I am not certain whether to be glad or afraid." Marin did not answer. She did not know either. She returned to Ravenshollow on the 3rd of January. She knew at once that something was wrong. Mrs. Cailhart met her at the door, but the housekeeper's face was tight, and her eyes did not quite meet Marin's. "Miss Holloway, what has happened?" "Lady Sabra returned the day after Boxing Day. She has been in residence since. There has been a great deal of company. Her ladyship has been at his side at every meal." Mrs. Cailhart's hands worked once at the keys at her waist. "There has been talk, a great deal of talk. I want you to be ready for it." "What talk?" "That an announcement is coming, Miss Holloway. That His Grace is to be engaged to Lady Sabra by 12th night. The household has been told to prepare. The plate has been brought down. Half of London is invited to a dinner on the 6th. He has not denied any of it." Marin stood very still. "I see." "Child, listen to me. He has not said a word to her, not one word that any servant in this house has overheard. She has done it all. She has brought the relations and accepted invitations in his name, and let it be understood that she shall be Duchess by spring. He has not stopped her, but he has not said the word himself. There is a difference. Thank you, Mrs. Cailhart." She went into the small library and shut the door, and she sat down at her desk, and she opened the green ledger, and she did not cry. She had been warned by her mother and by the old Duke himself, not to mistake the work for the woman who did it. He did not come to the library that evening, or the next. On the third evening, Lady Sabra came. She entered without knocking. She was in pale blue silk, pearls at her throat, every hair perfectly arranged. "Miss Holloway, I do hope I'm not interrupting. I shan't stay above a moment. I only wanted to bring you this." She set a small folded paper on the desk. "What is it, Lady Sabra?" "A reference, dear. From me. For your next position. I was speaking to Lady Halverton last night. She is in want of a companion for her elder daughter, who is rather a handful, but it is a respectable place. I thought of you at once. I have written you the warmest possible character. Lady Halverton will see you in February. The carriage will take you on the morning of the 7th. Marin did not pick up the paper. "I am not seeking a position, Lady Sabra. I have one." "Oh, my dear. But you must see, mustn't you, that the cataloging is finished? Or as good as. Cassian and I were speaking of it only this morning. He felt it was perhaps the moment to bring it to a graceful close. He could not bring himself to say it to you, of course. He is too kind. He has asked me to convey the matter in the gentlest way possible. I do hope I have managed it." Marin looked at her for a long moment. "Lady Sabra, did His Grace ask you to come and tell me this?" "My dear, did he? Yes or no?" A small flash, very brief behind the pale eyes. He suggested that the matter be handled with discretion. "I am, after all, to be his wife by the end of the month, and we must begin as we mean to go on. Take the reference, Miss Holloway. The carriage on the 7th. There will be no scene. We are all of us civilized people." She did not wait for an answer. She inclined her head and left. Marin sat alone with a paper on her desk that she had not picked up. She picked it up now. She unfolded it. It was indeed a glowing reference, addressed to Lady Halverton of Cumberland. The carriage details were noted at the bottom. The 7th of January, 8 in the morning. She folded the paper back up. She went to her room. She packed her things. The few that were hers, the dress, the ribbon, the books her mother had made her bring. And she left the rest. The cataloging notes, the green ledger, the half-finished work on the desk. She wrote a single short note. "Your Grace, I am called home. I thank you for your kindness. M.H." She left it on top of the ledger. She left it first light, before the household was up, on the carter's wagon that brought milk from the home farm to Aldwick. Mrs. Kalehart had been the only person to see her go. The housekeeper had said nothing. She had only put her arms around Marin briefly, and held her, and let her go. Her face had been wet. The wagon rocked through the winter dawn. Marin did not look back at Ravenshollow Hall. She told herself she had not been cast out. She told herself she had walked out with her own feet, and her own dignity, and her promise to her mother intact. She told herself a great many true things, and they did not warm her in the least. And somewhere outside the village of Aldwick, she finally bent her head over her hands and wept. She had been a fool, not because she had loved him. She had not let herself love him, but because she had begun to think she might be permitted to. That was the foolishness. It was a cleaner foolishness than most. It still hurt. She had been home 4 days when the letter came. It was brought not by a liveried rider this time, but by Mrs. Kalehart herself, in a hired chaise, in her best black wool, with snow on the shoulders of her cloak. She came up the lane and knocked, and Marin's mother opened the door, and the housekeeper said only, "Madam, may I speak with your daughter, please? The matter cannot wait." Marin came into the parlor. She had not been sleeping. She knew it showed. "Lady Sabra Vane has been removed from Ravenshollow Hall. She left yesterday afternoon. She will not be returning." The dinner of the 6th has been cancelled. Her trunks were carried out at 3 o'clock by 4 footmen, and her father was sent for and arrived this morning. And there was a meeting in the great library that lasted 40 minutes, and the Earl of Marwen left the house with his daughter and a face like a thundercloud. And I do not believe, Miss Holloway, that any member of that family will set foot inside Raven's Hollow again in my lifetime. Maren stared at her. What? What happened? You happened, child. You will understand. He has written you a letter. I have it here. I would not give it to a writer. Will you read it now? Yes. Please. Sit. Mrs. Cailhart sat. Maren took the letter. The seal was the raven over the tower. Maren, I came into the small library on the morning of the 4th and saw your note on the ledger, and I have been a man without sense for 2 days. I have only just got my mind back, and I shall use it before I lose it again. Lady Sabra Vane came to you on the evening of the 3rd and told you that I had asked her to dismiss you. None of this came from me. I knew nothing of it. I learned of it yesterday morning when Mrs. Cailhart found me in the library at 6 o'clock, looking at your empty chair like a man looking at a grave, and she sat me down and told me what had happened. I want you to understand, Maren, before you read another word, that I did not know. I have spent 3 years allowing Lady Sabra to behave in my house as though she were already its mistress, because it was easier than refusing her, and because my father was alive, and I trusted him to manage her. That has now ended. She is gone. She will not return. Her father has been told, in plain terms, that there has never been an engagement, has never been a discussion of an engagement, and that any rumor to the contrary that emerges from his household after today shall be answered for in court. That, however, is not why I am writing. I am writing because I went into the small library at 6 o'clock on the morning of the 4th, and I sat in the chair you sat in, and I read the last entry you had written in the green ledger, and I understood, sitting there, 3 things at once, with great clarity. The first is that my father was right, in every word of his letter. The second is that I love you, Maren. I have known it since the afternoon you read his letter and laid it on your lap and did not weep. I knew it again the day we walked the South Terrace, and I told you about my mother, and you laughed. I have not said it because I did not believe I had earned the right. I had been alone too long. I did not know how, and while I was deciding when I might speak, Lady Sabra Vane decided for me, in her way. The third is that I have no right to ask you to come back, on any terms, after what was done to you under my roof in my name. I have no right, and I shall not pretend to one. I am not asking you to come back. I am writing only to say what I should have said in the small library by the fire some weeks ago. You are not a remedy. You are not a project. You are not a glass case. You are a person whom I love, and I shall love whether or not you come back, and I shall love whether or not you ever wish to see me again. If you do wish to see me, Mrs. Cailhart will return with you. If you do not, send her back alone, and I shall not trouble you. I shall send the annuity my father provided for, which is yours by his will, and not by my gift, and shall not write again. I shall accept either answer. I am sorry, Maren. I am sorrier than I know how to write. Yours, whether or not you choose to be mine. Cassian. Maren held the letter in her lap. She read certain sentences 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and set it down, and she looked across at Mrs. Cailhart, whose eyes, for the first time since Maren had known her, were frankly wet. Maren stood up. Mrs. Cailhart, I shall need a quarter of an hour to speak with my mother. After that, if the chaise can wait, I shall go back with you. The chaise can wait, Miss Holloway? She found her mother in the kitchen, kneading bread, and she put the letter into her mother's flour-dusted hands. Her mother read it without speaking, and when she was finished, she set it down and looked at her daughter for a long, quiet moment. "Well, child, has he put you in a glass case?" "No, Mama. No. He has done a more dangerous thing. He has handed you the key and walked away. What shall you do with it?" "I shall go back, Mama." "Yes. I thought you would. Go on. Pack quickly." She picked the letter up again and held it for a second. "He writes well, your Duke." "He is not my Duke, Mama." Her mother smiled, very faintly, for the first time in 4 days. "No, child. Not yet." The journey back to Raven's Hollow took 6 hours on roads heavy with new snow, and Mrs. Cailhart did not speak above a dozen sentences. She seemed to understand that Marin needed the silence. She did not know yet what she was going to say to him. She knew she had to look him in the face. They came up the avenue of yews at twilight. There was no procession of footmen at the door this time, only Mrs. Cailhart's own boy with a lantern. The household, Marin saw, had been kept away. Of course it had. "He is in the small library, Miss Holloway. I shall not announce you. Walk in when you are ready." "Thank you, Mrs. Cailhart." "Child, whatever you say to him in there is yours to say. Do not blunt it. We have had enough blunted speech in this house for a generation. He will stand it. I promise you, he will stand it." Marin nodded. She walked along the corridor she had walked so often now, and she stood at the door of the small library, and she did not knock. She turned the handle. He was at the fire. He was not at the desk this time. He was standing at the hearth, with one hand on the marble mantel, and his head bent low, and he had not heard the door, and for a moment she stood in the doorway and looked at him. The long line of his back, the slight tremor in the hand that rested on the marble, and she understood, with a quietness that surprised her, that whatever else this man was, he was, at this moment, simply afraid. Cassian. He turned. He saw her in the doorway, and his face did a thing she would not forget. Went perfectly still for a half-second, as though he did not quite believe his own eyes, and then crumpled at the edges, just slightly, just enough to be human, before he gathered it again. "Marin. I am here. I see that you are. I read your letter. I see that, too." She closed the door behind her. She walked toward him until she was perhaps 3 feet away. She did not sit. She stood very straight in Mary Cailhart's gray wool dress, with the dark ribbon in her hair, and her hands clasped in front of her, exactly the way her mother stood at the front of the chapel on Sundays. "Cassian, I'm going to say several things, and you are going to let me say them all before you answer." "Yes?" "Yes." The first. Your father's letter is the kindest thing anyone has ever written about me, and I shall keep it for the rest of my life. But it doesn't bind me. I am not here because he arranged me. I am here because I have read your letter, and I have decided, in my own voice, to come. He set the table. He did not seat us. We are seating ourselves. Yes? Yes. The second. I do not blame you for Lady Sabra. I blame you for how long you let her behave as she did. But I do not blame you for what she said to me on the third. She is responsible for that. You are responsible for the room she was permitted to do it in. You have closed the room. I accept it. We shall not speak of her again unless we must. Yes. The third. Her throat tightened, but only for a second. I love you also, Cassian Allard. I have loved you, I think, since the South Terrace. I have not said it because I did not know whether I was being seen or being wanted, and there is a difference between those two things. And I shall not be wanted by a man who is not first of all seeing me. You have written that you see me. I believe you. I shall hold you to it. You may. The fourth, I will not become a duchess overnight. I will not be made into one. I do not know whether I ever wish to be one at all, and I am not deciding it tonight, and you are not asking me to. Are you? I am not. Good. The fifth, then, and the last. She drew a long breath. I shall not move into this house, Cassian. Not yet. I shall come, as I have been coming. Half the month, I shall finish cataloging your father's papers. We shall go slowly. We shall go like ordinary people who have time, because we have time. You have lost your father 2 months ago. I have lost a piece of something I cannot quite name in the last fortnight. Neither of us is fit, just yet, to make any decision more important than the next cup of tea. Do you agree? I agree. Then come and sit down, Cassian. You look as though you have not eaten in 3 days, and I have been in a chaise for 6 hours. He laughed. It was the second laugh she had ever heard from him, and it was hoarser than the first, and shorter, and it broke in the middle. But it was a laugh, and he came across the hearthrug, and he took her hand. Only her hand, only that. And he raised it slowly to his mouth and pressed his forehead against the back of it. Not his lips, his forehead. The way a man might press his head against a doorframe to steady himself. He stood like that for perhaps 5 seconds, and she did not move. And when he lifted his head, his eyes were full and unhidden and gray as his father's. Marin. I am very glad you came back. So am I, Cassian. They sat down by the fire. Mrs. Cailhart came in, without having been called, with a tray of tea and bread and butter and a small plate of honeyed cake, and set it between them, and went out without looking at either of them. They ate. They did not speak for a long time. They did not need to. When at last the fire had burned down to its red heart, he said, very low, I did not know, until you walked through that door, that I would survive your not coming. I think I would have. I am hard to kill. But I should have been a worse man for the rest of my life, and I should have known why, every day. I am telling you this so that you know it, and so that I have said it once aloud. Yes? Yes, Cassian. He reached across the table, slowly, and took her hand, and held it in his. And they sat like that, hand resting on hand, for as long as the fire lasted, and the small library held the two of them, and the great house held the small library. And somewhere, Marin thought, in whatever country the dead hold, an old man with gray eyes and a green coat was at last permitted to rest. Spring came late to Raven's Hollow that year. The thaw did not begin until almost the end of March. In April, the small library was finished. Marin wrote the last entry in the green ledger on a Tuesday afternoon, while a thin sun came in through the window. She closed the ledger, and Cassian, who was reading in the armchair by the fire, looked up and saw her face and set his book down. Done. Done. Then we shall begin something else. What they began was a slow and unfashionable courtship, conducted half at Raven's Hollow and half by letter. He came to the cottage in Aldwyck 4 times that spring, in plain dress, and sat at the kitchen table with Marin's mother and ate the bread she had baked, and answered Tobin's questions about Cambridge, and walked with Marin on the lane in full view of the village. The village watched and gossiped, and gradually stopped gossiping, because there was nothing to feed gossip on. In May, Cassian asked Marin to marry him in the small library by the fire on an evening when the windows were open onto the kitchen garden and a thrush was singing somewhere beyond the wall. He did not kneel. His father would have laughed at him for it. He simply asked. She said yes. They sat for a while afterward and did not speak. At last Marin said, "We shall have to tell Mrs. Cailhart." And Cassian said, "Mrs. Cailhart has known for 3 months," and they both laughed. They were married in the family chapel at Ravenshollow in July, on a morning so clear that the moor showed 30 miles to the north. There were not many guests. Marin's mother was there, in a dress of pale gray silk Cassian had paid for. Tobin was there in his first proper coat. The doctor with the gold spectacles came. Mrs. Cailhart stood at the back and did not weep until afterwards. Lady Sabra Vane was not present. She had married in March a Yorkshire baronet of considerable wealth and very little conversation. After the wedding, the household assembled in the great hall. Cassian presented his duchess to them. Marin stood beside him in green silk and the small string of pearls that had been his mother's, and she looked along the rows and saw something she had not expected. Not awe, not fear, but a kind of quiet relief, as though the household had been holding its breath for a great many years and could at last exhale. She made them a small speech. It was 4 sentences long. She said that she was very glad to be in their house, and that she would learn their names as quickly as she could, and that she hoped they would be patient with her, and that she thanked them for the welcome they had given her, which she would not forget. An elderly groom in the back row was openly weeping into his cap. That night, very late, after the small wedding supper had ended, Cassian led Marin up to the long gallery. He carried a single candle. They walked the length of it together in their bare feet, because it had been a long day. He stopped before the painting of his father. "There is a thing I have wanted to do tonight, and I have not been able to do it before now. Will you stand with me?" "Yes." He looked up at the painted face of his father and said very quietly, "Father, she came. She's here. She is mine, and I am hers. And we have not been put into a glass case, and we have not been made into a project, and we are 2 people who have decided, in our own voices, to be together. I have done what you asked. It took me longer than it should have. I should very much have liked you to be here today. But I think you have, in a way, already met." Marin took his hand. "He met me before either of us knew he had," she said. "On the Northbridge Road, in a dream, in August. I have decided not to ask what it was he saw. I think it is the kind of question that only spoils a thing if it is answered. He gave me to you, Cassian, by writing me into a letter on the morning of his death. We shall give him whatever we can, the chair in the small library on Sunday afternoons, the seat at the table on his birthday. He shall have a place in this house for as long as we are in it." Yes, they stood a little longer. Then Cassian blew out the candle, and they walked back along the gallery in the dark, hand in hand. 2 years later, Marin found the second letter. It was October. She was sitting in the small library on a wet afternoon, the same kind of wet afternoon as the one on which she had first found a stranger in a ditch, with Cowper's poems open on her lap. Their first child, a daughter, was asleep in a basket by the fire. Cassian was at the home farm, where a cow was calving badly. The book had a small bulge in the back inner board that Marin had never quite noticed. The corner had caught the light at an unusual angle, and she saw that the marbled paper of the inside cover was very faintly lifted at one edge. She fetched a paper knife. She slit, very carefully, along the lifted edge. The folded paper inside was no larger than her palm. The handwriting on the outside was the fine old educated hand of the 7th Duke of Ravenshollow, "To Marin when she is ready." She sat very still. Then she walked to the door and called, quietly, for Mrs. Cailhart. Mrs. Cailhart came and sat in the armchair across the fire and folded her hands and said only, "Open it, child." He has waited long enough. Marin broke the seal. "My dear, if you are reading this, it is because some good time has passed, and you have at last sat down with that book of Cowper, which I sent your mother in the autumn of the year I died. For I sent the books, knowing where I should hide this, and which book she would weep over, and which book you would, in the end, take down again. I have always known that my son would love you. I dreamed it the same August night I dreamed the Northbridge Road. I did not write that into the letter you read in the small library, because I did not wish to bind either of you. Love arranged in advance is no love at all. So I wrote nothing of it. I let the two of you find your way. But I have known also, that you would, in the meantime, save him, not in the great way the village will tell it, in a smaller, harder, better way. Day by day, hour by hour, sitting by his fire and not letting him become the man the world has been calling him. I could not do it. His mother could not do it. And she was a great woman. I leave it to you because you can. I am writing to tell you, from the other side of whatever river divides us, that it has been worth it. That it always will have. That a man saved like that is a man who saves, in his turn, more people than either of you will ever count. The great fortunes of this house will pass. The title will pass. The fields will go under the plow of someone else's grandsons. The kindness you have put into my son will outlast all of them. I have lived long enough to know what lasts. Kindness lasts. Almost nothing else does. Kiss the children for me, Marin. There will be children. I have seen them too. Forgive me for an old man's certainties. They are the only thing I have left to give you, and I give them freely. I loved you the moment you knelt down in the mud. I shall love you in whatever way the dead may love, for as long as you live in my son's house, and after, and after, and after. Henry. Marin laid the letter down upon her lap. This time she wept. She wept properly, the way she had not wept on the day Mrs. Calehart had brought the first letter, and she did not try to stop. Mrs. Calehart did not say anything, only got up and put a hand on Marin's hair, briefly. And when Cassian came in an hour later from the home farm with mud on his boots, the cow had lived, the calf had lived. He saw her face, and he saw the open letter, and he sat down on the rug beside her chair and laid his head against her knee, and she put her hand into his dark hair, and they didn't speak. And in the basket by the fire, their daughter, whom they had named Lynette, because Cassian had asked, on the night she was born, whether it would be too much, whether it would be enough, and Marin had only held the baby a little tighter and said, "Yes, Cassian, that is exactly her name," woke quietly, made a small, uncomplaining sound like a question, and was answered by her mother and her father at once. "Yes, my love. We are here. We are here." Outside, the long October rain came down upon the moor. Inside, the small library was warm and a fire burned, and an old man's letter lay open in a young woman's lap, and a great house held its breath around them, the way great houses do, for a moment only, when something has gone right, at last, in a place that has been waiting. Thank you for being here. Truly, you are the reason these stories are written, and the reason they are told, and the reason, somewhere in a room you may be sitting in right now, with a fire or a lamp or only the small light of your screen, they keep finding people to be told to. If Marin and Cassian moved you, even a little, please let me know in the comments. Tell me which moment stayed with you. Tell me which line you would like to read again. Tell me whose hand, in your own life, you have held when it mattered, or whose hand has held yours. Your stories are why these stories exist, and if you would like more like this, slow, kind, hard-won, with old letters and quiet rooms and people who learn, by inches, to stop being afraid, please consider subscribing. There are more stories coming. There is room for you in every one of them. Until next time, dear listener. Be kind to a stranger on a road. You never know whose father you might be holding.